Hello, my name is Kamran and today we will discuss how to configure MySQL InnoDB ClusterSet. In our previous videos, we have configured MySQL InnoDB Cluster, then we configured MySQL InnoDB Replica set, and now we will configure MySQL InnoDB ClusterSet. So, what is InnoDB ClusterSet? InnoDB ClusterSet is the set of, it is the combination of InnoDB clusters. Like we have on this region, we have this InnoDB cluster, then we have this one, and then we have this. So we have one primary InnoDB cluster, then we have the replicas, two replicas. We can have one replica as well, so there's not an issue. Okay, so the between them is the asynchronous replication. This is the main point. Uh, Within a region we have configured MySQL InnoDB cluster, which in which we will achieve the high availability. Uh, because there is no data loss and there is automatic failover, there is no manual intervention. So within a region we have the we have the high availability solution. And if we talk about the whole InnoDB cluster set as a disaster recovery solution, then there is there might be some data loss because this is asynchronous replication, and the manual intervention will be there because we need to manually failover to the other node if the primary goes down. There is no it will not take that much time, but because it is just one command to failover to the other surviving node. Okay, so as this is asynchronous replication, so the write performance is very good, and there is no impact on that. Okay, and there can be another solution, like we can have we can configure InnoDB cluster, and we can have one node on some other location, and one node on some other, and the third node on some other. The limitation is here that you need to have a very stable WAN to have this topology, because there is synchronous replication between them. And the other limitation is that uh, you can you have to have three nodes at least. So you need at least three data centers to have a valid InnoDB cluster. So that's why we have MySQL InnoDB cluster set for the disaster recovery solution. Okay, so we will now start to configure the InnoDB cluster set. I have six nodes with me. Three nodes will act as one InnoDB cluster, and the other three will act as another InnoDB cluster. So we will create InnoDB cluster set for these two InnoDB cluster. Okay, so I have six VMs. This one is will be the primary cluster, InnoDB cluster 5, 6, and 7, and 11, 12, 13 will be the replica InnoDB cluster. Okay, so there are some prerequisites as well, like to have the server ID, set on each node in the configuration file of the database. So I have set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in each of the configuration file of the database on each node, and there should have the same to have a unique UUID for each node. UUID, I have faced an error with the same UUID because I have copied one VM and created another VM, so I faced the same UUID. So what you can do is that there is a auto CNF file. Let me show you. So in the data dir ls auto. Okay, this one. This file is auto-generated, and you need to delete this file and then restart the MySQL service. Then the UID will be generated uniquely. Okay, the other prerequisite is that you need to have host file updated with all your nodes in the cluster, because I will be using the host name, not the IPs. So if you are going to use the host names in the configurations, then you need to update all the host file in each node uh, with their respective host names and their IPs. Okay, let me connect to. Okay, so I have the 5, 6, and 7 nodes are configured as InnoDB cluster. Okay, and you need to have the same configuration. I mean, you need to configure every node to have a cluster, to have a user which can for the management of the cluster. So you need to have a same user, same password on each of the node. um, like we have 6 nodes, so you need to have the same username and password for those. Okay, so this node is already configured as InnoDB cluster. You can check my previous video for how to configure MySQL InnoDB cluster. I will also mention the link how to configure the InnoDB cluster. Okay. Um, okay, so 11, 12, 13 are not are not configured as InnoDB cluster. We will do it from here, from this node, from this cluster, and I will show you how to do it. Okay, so but the the prerequisites like to have the same username and password are already configured, and if you want to know how to do that, then you can check the video or previous videos, so you will get to know how to configure each node to have to be eligible for InnoDB cluster. Okay, let me connect to MySQL shell. MySQL shell is a very strong utility which has JavaScript and Python and everything. It has admin APIs which makes your life very easier. I have talked about it in the previous video. You can check that. Okay, let's connect to the database using the cadmin user I have created. Sorry, local host. Okay, we will set the variable cluster1 dba.get cluster cluster1 dot status. Okay, so this is already configured as InnoDB cluster. We have MySQL 1 as in the read write mode, and we have MySQL 2 as read only and MySQL 3 as the read only. So this is a working InnoDB cluster. Okay, from other node we will also open the router log file. Okay, let me. Okay, now we will create the cluster set. Cluster1 dot create cluster set, and we will call it let's say test cluster set. Okay, so cluster set successfully created. Okay, and there in the router log file we have a warning. The target cluster is a part of the cluster set, but this router was not bootstrapped to use the cluster set. So we bootstrapped the router only for the InnoDB cluster. Now as we are now configuring the cluster set, then we need to rebootstrap with the force option, uh, because it is now the part of the cluster set, and there is some settings which needs to be changed. Like you see, the router settings are not ideal. Like the TTL is set to 0.5 seconds in the InnoDB cluster, but in the if we have this much of TTL, and then each router on each site will ping or get the information from each node within that 0.5 seconds, which is very much higher and can overload the database. So when you reconfigure rebootstrap it, then it will go to 5 seconds. So we can also check it from here, like cluster dot list routers. Okay, now okay, we need to set a variable for the cluster set. We will call it cluster set equal to db dot get cluster set. Okay, and then we will do cluster set dot list routers. Okay, so we have the cluster set name here, and the router has a warning. Router must be bootstrapped again for the cluster set to be recognized. As it was previously configured for InnoDB cluster, now we need to rebootstrap it to configure it for a cluster set. Okay. I will open another window. Okay. First we will stop the router. Okay, and now stopped. Now we will bootstrap it using this command, MySQL router minus bootstrap. Get the history of the command I previously used. Yeah, there it is. You can use this one. MySQL router minus bootstrap cadmin localhost. So this is the directory where the router is. For the router files are there. This is the account. We have already configured this account, and this is the OS user we have. We will do bootstrap it in the fourth one. Okay, so it's asking for the password. Password is okay. So now it's bootstrapped with the configuration. Now we will start the router. Okay. And there are the group replication notices for these three VMs. Okay, so now we will add the replicas. We will add the 11, 12, and 13 MySQL 4, 5, and 6 machines as InnoDB cluster to this replica set. Cluster set. Okay, so before this, the prerequisite to add another replica as an InnoDB cluster, you need to configure those instances to have the same username and password and the parameters which it automatically fix. Okay, so we will add cluster set dot create replica cluster, and we will add its first node, which is MySQL 4.lab.com 3306 create cluster set. Okay. And we will call the new cluster. We will call the new InnoDB cluster new cluster. We will call it new cluster. Okay, so let's start, and it is now adding the instance replica cluster new cluster successfully created on cluster set test CS. Okay, so there's a lot of thing happening. Okay, we can check the status of it, cluster set dot status, and you can see we have clusters like new cluster and test cluster. New cluster is the replica, and the test cluster is the primary node with the primary instance of MySQL 1. Okay, Okay, we need to set the variable for the new cluster, which will be the get cluster. Sorry, we will name it as cluster2. The variable will be cluster2, and db.get cluster, and we will mention its name, which is new cluster. So the variable is set. Now we will do cluster2.status. So for the replica InnoDB cluster, we have one node added, which is MySQL 4, and it's the primary, which is the primary member of the replica. And it's in read-only mode. Uh, every node in the replica will be super read-only mode, so there is no read-write on the replica. Okay, we will add other instances as well. Okay, command will be cluster2 dot add instance, and then we will mention the host name. Okay, the second node is now been adding. So I told you that I will be adding the InnoDB cluster with its nodes from this site. So I have added another node, and we can get its status, and it will show us that MySQL 5 is also added in the InnoDB new cluster. This is the secondary node in the InnoDB cluster on the replica side with read-only mode. Okay, let's add the third node, which is MySQL 6. It will not take much time, so there's no data in it. Just okay. Now we'll get the status again, and now we have three nodes in the new cluster of the replica InnoDB cluster: MySQL 4, 5, and 6. With this one is the primary, this one is these two are secondary. Each one of them is in a super read-only mode. Okay. We can get the status of the cluster set, and okay, let me get an extended version of the status, and we can do it using extended. Yeah, so in the extended you have a lot of more information. We can check it, like let me show you. Test cluster is the primary primary cluster in the cluster set. Okay, so its primary node is MySQL 1. We can change this node using one command, and it will be changed to the primary role will be changed to another node like MySQL 2 or 3. Okay, and we can also change the primary of the replica cluster, which is let me show you this one. MySQL 4 is the primary node in the replica cluster, so we can change this as well. And we can also change the whole InnoDB cluster to become primary. Okay, this one is the replica. Okay, the new cluster is the replica, so we can change it to become primary, and the test cluster will become the replica. Okay, so you can also get the extended 2, which will have a lot of more information, and you can also get the extended 3, so it will much more information you can check. Okay, let's do the first. We will do to set the primary instance. So we will change the primary instance of the primary cluster, like we have cluster1 dot status. So we have the primary role of MySQL 1. We can change this using this command, cluster1 dot set primary instance, and we will tell it to MySQL 3 to become the primary instance of the primary cluster. So it has been changed, and you can see in the router log file as well that these two are now read only and the primary instance is now MySQL 3. We can also change the primary instance of the replica, like in the new cluster, which is the cluster 2, the replica InnoDB cluster. We will do cluster2.status. Here we have MySQL 4 as the primary node. We will change it to MySQL 6. So we can do cluster2 dot set primary instance to MySQL 6 notlab.com3306, and it's changed to let me show you this status. So MySQL 6 is the primary and the other two are now in secondary role. Okay, for the disaster, as this is the disaster recovery solution, so for some reason if you want to have the replica as the primary cluster, then we can do it by using cluster set is the variable name, then you can do set primary cluster to what for this name, new cluster, new cluster. So a lot of things are happening now, so it's verifying and it is updating the topology, the replication source is changed. Okay, so at the end it will show you that new cluster was promoted to primary of the cluster set. The primary instance is now MySQL 6. So if we do the cluster set status, then it will show you that new cluster is now the primary and the test cluster is now the replica. And if we do the cluster in extended mode status, okay, test cluster is now the replica, and this is now new cluster is now the primary, and the 6 will be the read write node and the other two will be in the read only mode. So you can route your read write operation to the new cluster now. So that's how you are you can switch over to the um, other cluster in the cluster set. Okay, for some reason there is an emergency and there is a disaster on the primary side, then you can use the cluster set dot force primary cluster. So it will forcefully fail over to the surviving cluster. You have to mention its name here, so that's how you are gonna fail over to that. Okay, you can also remove instances from each InnoDB cluster. Like I have cluster 1, I will remove it from cluster 2 just to show you how it's done. Cluster2 dot remove instance, and we will give MySQL 4 dot lab.com 3306. So it will remove that MySQL 4 from the cluster. So if you get the status of cluster 2 clusters 2, it will show you MySQL 5 minus MySQL 6 only. Okay, so that's it from the MySQL InnoDB cluster set. If you have any question, then you can email me or you can comment on my video, so I will reach out to you and will explain how things are done. So let me know if you want to have some you want to configure some other MySQL MongoDB or Oracle DB2, anything. I will make a video and show it to you how it's done. So that's it from this video. I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.